Over the past couple months, I've been going through each film on the IMDb Top 250 list. Seeing as these are some of the most legendary films of all time, a majority of them I've already heard of, and 12 Angry Men was no exception. However, that was only in passing. I was excited to discuss films like The Shawshank Redemption, and especially The Godfather, but 12 Angry Men just didn't catch my eye as much. After having seen it though, I can see why it's rated so highly. This might just be a perfect film if one did ever exist. I am getting a bit ahead of myself though. 12 Angry Men is a 1957 feature film based on a teleplay written by Reginald Rose. Rose got the idea after he served as a juror in a manslaughter case in 1954. Rose realized that many people didn't actually know what happened during jury deliberations and felt that it could be an exciting setting for drama. The screenplay he ended up writing was initially produced for television, which meant it had to be cut down in order to fit within the 55-minute time slot. This adaptation caught the attention of Henry Fonda, an acclaimed actor who recently formed his own production company. And in 1965, Rose and Fonda partnered to produce a film adaptation of 12 Angry Men. Rose decided to put some cut material back into his screenplay and also added dialogue to further flesh out the characters. Fonda and Rose recruited Sidney Lumet to direct the adaptation. This would be Lumet's directorial debut in film, but he had worked with Rose before. Lumet then recruited Boris Kaufman as cinematographer. Kaufman was coming off an Academy Award win and was known for his realistic style. This made him a natural fit given the grounded nature of this story. The film was shot in less than 3 weeks and released on April 10, 1957. While it initially was a disappointment at the box office, it eventually found success on television. Nowadays, it's extremely well regarded and is considered an all-time classic. It has a score of 9 out of 10 on IMDb and 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It was even selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. Then again, so was Spy Kids, so that doesn't mean much. Either way, 12 Angry Men receives praise from just about every possible source. Why is this the case? The first shot is outside of the courthouse. This immediately establishes the setting, and as an audience, we better take this shot in, because we won't be exiting this building until the very last scene. We then enter the courthouse. The scene starts with a shot of the ceiling, slowly panning down to reveal several people on the level below. In particular, there are 2 men walking through the pillars in the center of the frame, just as the camera reaches them. I don't know if anyone else thought this, but I assume that these may be our protagonists. After all, they are perfectly centered in the frame for a split second, before the camera continues panning down. However, we suddenly begin following a man with a briefcase as he walks in front of the camera. As he enters an elevator, we then begin tracking the man that exited that same elevator. He seems distressed about something, but just as quickly as he attracts our attention, the camera follows the man behind him. We follow this man as he excitedly runs down the hall with a smile on his face. He just got off the phone, presumably receiving some good news. We'll never find out what that news is though, because as soon as he reaches the group at the end of the hall, the camera settles in front of the doors of the courtroom. And there's a few things I love about this sequence. Firstly, the energy. This is all one shot. The camera seamlessly tracks each subject as they move. We get a variety of facial expressions, and these continuously shake up the atmosphere for the audience. Seeing as we aren't quite sure what the story is about yet, we don't know what we're supposed to latch onto. That is until the camera finally rests in front of the courtroom. Another thing I love about this sequence is the curiosity it inspires in the audience. I found myself wanting to know what those 2 men were discussing on the ground level, who the guy with the briefcase was, why the man coming out the elevator was so distressed, and what news this man excitedly wanted to share with his group. This all solidified one thought in my mind. There are many stories to be told in this courthouse. The camera just happened to settle outside of this room, so that's the story we're going to be told. It gives the idea that this tale is nothing out of the ordinary. It's a story brimming with drama and it could happen anywhere. You just have to know where to look. I don't know if this was entirely intentional, but that's the idea it left for me anyway. And all that was established in a single 47-second shot, which in itself is impressive due to the technicality of it. Both conceptually and technically, it's flawless. I've seen this film referred to as a courtroom drama a few times, which isn't technically wrong I guess, but it's funny because there's only a single scene that takes place in a courtroom. The judge explains the situation to the audience. This is a murder case. The jurors have to come to a unanimous decision on whether or not the defendant is guilty. If he's found guilty, he'll be sentenced to death. The judge puts it simply. One man is dead, and another man's life is at stake. As he says, they're faced with a grave responsibility. This is pretty serious stuff. Despite that, this is the judge's face when delivering that information. Clearly, we can see that this trial isn't being treated with the proper gravity. In this scene, we also get a look at all 12 jurors, and there's a lot we can learn about each by examining their body language. It's unlikely a viewer picks up on all this on their initial viewing, but on rewatch, we find that each character's expression and body language is consistent with their mentality. For instance, Lee J. Cobb's character, Juror 3, is glaring at the defendant, appearing to have some personal vendetta against him. Finally, for the scene, we get a shot of the defendant, where it's revealed that he's just a kid who is absolutely terrified. From here, the opening credits begin as each juror shuffles into this room. This is where the rest of our story takes place. One may assume that this would get boring at a certain point, but that isn't the case for multiple reasons. I'll highlight two though. Firstly, the film is only 96 minutes long. And secondly, I mentioned the energy in the cinematography earlier, but that's on full display from here on out. The camera work is beyond impressive. It was impressive at the time, and even today is perfect. During the opening credits, the camera is high up as we see each juror enter the room. Instead of cutting, however, we follow several characters as they make their way around the room. Each character has a conversation that shows us their personalities and motivations, and I can only imagine how difficult this must have been to film. The shot is just over 6 minutes long and features several different characters and conversations. This is impressive enough nowadays, and all the more so in 1957. A complaint 12 Angry Men gets nowadays is that the cast isn't varied enough. And while it is true that every character is a white man, I personally found the cast extremely varied. No two characters are alike in personality. It also is fairly realistic that no women or people of color are represented here. My understanding is that women weren't commonly found in juries until the 1960s, and as for people of color, while racial discrimination for jury selection is illegal, there are confirmed cases of it happening as late as 2004, nearly 50 years after this film's release. I think it's safe to say that 12 Angry Men was realistic in its casting choices. The only reason I bring this up is because I found some people online use this as a legitimate knock against the film, which is frankly ridiculous. Speaking of the characters, as I mentioned, they're all extremely varied, and their personalities shine as this debate develops. The debate, of course, centers around the guilt of the defendant. Before the debate even begins, it's clear that a majority believe the kid to be guilty. To start off, the characters take a preliminary vote, and 11 of the 12 jurors vote guilty. One man, however, Juror 8, played by Henry Fonda, votes not guilty. From here, the debate develops. Keep in mind, we know next to nothing about this trial. It's through the jury deliberation that we learn about this case. Throughout the events of the story, the debate intensifies, and this is portrayed in a few ways. People get angrier, jurors switch sides, the room gets hotter, and a thunderstorm begins. But the cinematography plays a role in this as well. At the beginning of the debate, shots are wide, often showing multiple characters. Shots are also long. Instead of cutting, we mostly track characters as they move. As the debate progresses, shots get tighter and cut more frequently. The lighting also changes because of the storm. It even gets to a point where Juror 1 has to walk over and flick on the lights. I won't get into the debate itself, because to me that is something that has to be experienced, and it can't be explained. But there were a few moments in particular that I loved. The moment when Juror 8 reveals the identical knife was when I realized this film had plenty of tricks up its sleeve. It wasn't all just pretty camera work and witty dialogue. Actually, speaking of dialogue, that is another thing this film does expertly. For a screenplay that has 12 people talking in a room, you need to have good dialogue. But I'd go a step beyond that and say that the script is perfect. It's genuinely airtight. The conversation flows in a realistic way, the intensity increases naturally, and each line of dialogue fits the character who delivered it. Never did I feel like the character was simply tasked with moving the plot forward. They truly act as individuals. I mentioned earlier how varied the cast is, and that is so important to the script as well. There are 12 characters and none have a name. Instead, they are simply referred to by their number. For example, our protagonist is Juror 8 and our antagonist is Juror 3. Without distinct identities, their personalities need to be where the distinction and thus conflict stems from. This also ensures that the audience can relate to at least one of these men and view the case through that lens. By putting ourselves in this debate, we're even more engaged in it as the evidence piles up. For me personally, Juror 4 was the most relatable. His logical view of the trial and reliance on the facts of the case made him one of the most appealing characters. He spends the majority of the story believing that the defendant is guilty, with a large part of his belief being due to the testimony of the kid's neighbor. He serves as the logical side of the guilty argument. Seeing as our protagonist is on the side of not guilty, naturally, the audience is going to be drawn in that direction. But the film does two things to prevent us from blindly agreeing with that argument. Firstly, Juror 6 has a conversation with our protagonist while in the bathroom, where he brings up something interesting. There is always a possibility that they agree that the kid is not guilty and get it wrong, thus letting a murderer get away scot-free. This weighs heavily both on our mind and the mind of our protagonist. And the second thing that has the audience hesitate in this debate is the previously mentioned Juror 4. He truly believes the defendant is guilty, and his arguments seem logical. The point where he's convinced to the contrary was also the moment where I began to believe the same. The eyeglasses debate was especially interesting to me. I personally wear glasses, and as was brought out in this debate, they leave those bruises on my nose. When Juror 4 took off his glasses to rub his nose, I immediately knew what he was doing and where Juror 9 was going with his questions. The whole thing had me on the edge of my seat, and that also marked the moment where I was convinced there was at least reasonable doubt in this case. And for different audience members, it'll be other moments of the debate. Perhaps the bit about knife fighting, the L tracks, the layout of the house, or perhaps the kid's background. Maybe some audience members were even unconvinced to the bitter end, similar to Juror 3, at least until his meltdown, which is where a majority of the emotional weight comes from in this story. Finally putting the clues together that Juror 3's anger comes from his own failure puts the whole debate in a new light. Juror 3 personally needed this guilty verdict. His emotional involvement is somewhat understandable, but has no place on a jury. I previously mentioned the kid's background, but I'd like to elaborate on that point. One of the first things established about this case is that the kid is a minority and was raised in a slum. The jury has both a man raised in a slum and a European. Most importantly for this bit of information, though, is Juror 10. On first viewing, the most interesting thing about his character at the outset is that he has a cold. He does say some things that are questionable, though. For instance, he says the defendant is one of them. The audience treats these comments much like the characters, though. They're promptly ignored and the conversation continues. Juror 10's prejudice reaches a boiling point, though, as he goes on a near 3-minute rant about how the defendant's people can't be trusted. The shot begins close to his face, however it slowly zooms out, revealing the entire room. One by one, the jurors leave the table, leaving Juror 10 completely alone, until Juror 4 cuts through the silence and tells him not to speak again. This not only was a compelling moment within the context of the story, but it also serves as a powerful lesson on how to deal with these kinds of situations. Often when someone says something we don't like, our initial response is to take offense and fire back as quickly and decisively as possible, and there is a time and place for that. More often than not, though, debate would get us nowhere. The best response is to stay silent and take your leave, and this action often embarrasses hateful people in the process. Like I said, there is a time and a place to take a stand for your convictions, but for the sake of example, the replies of a Twitter post or the comments of a YouTube video aren't usually that place. The art of silence is something that seems to be getting lost as time goes by and as people continually insist on their opinions. While some may assume that a film made in 1957 is outdated, it proves itself to be more and more relevant as time goes on. Another reason for this timelessness is found in the film's simplicity. A bulk of the narrative takes place in a single room. The story is grounded in reality, so no visual effects were needed, and the characters don't rely on trends, so their dialogue hasn't become outdated. The concept also lends itself to simplicity. A story needs a protagonist and an antagonist, forces working directly opposite to one another. We see that with Juror 8 and Juror 3. And what could be simpler than a debate on guilty versus not guilty? There could not be a more direct opposite. The one complex thing is the cinematography, which has aged exceptionally well. Sidney Lumet would go on to have a long and storied career, and that should have been evident by the mastery on display in his directorial debut. A small thing that I absolutely love is how characters will occasionally look directly into the camera. This is done when a character is speaking to the person on the opposite side of it. We don't realize until after that the shot was from the recipient's point of view. It's not done often, but it helps in getting the audience involved in this debate. We feel as though we're in this very room with the characters. 12 Angry Men has a perfect script, incredible cinematography, and relatable characters. On top of that, it touches on complex themes like the value of a human life and how a person's background and experiences shape their worldview. It even delves into more controversial topics like prejudice and the potential effects it could have in obstructing justice. In the film's lack of complexity, it fails to reach the heights of movies like The Godfather Parts 1 and 2. However, in its simplicity, it achieves perfection. In my eyes, it is entirely without flaw, which isn't something I can say about any other film I've seen to date. I highly recommend this movie to everyone. It's free on YouTube at the time of me recording this, and it's only 96 minutes, so it's a quick watch. Next up, I'll be getting back into Christopher Nolan's filmography with his sophomore feature, Memento. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.